You're listening to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, created to help you succeed in your educational journey. Learn more at baremetalcyber.com, where additional prepcasts, books, and training materials await. Let's get started. Negligence and unfair and deceptive acts and practices, or UDAP, form two of the most frequently used enforcement pathways in privacy disputes. Negligence arises when organizations fail to exercise reasonable care in safeguarding personal data, resulting in foreseeable harm. UDAP, by contrast, focuses on the accuracy and fairness of representations made to consumers, particularly in privacy notices, disclosures, and product claims. Together, these frameworks create overlapping accountability. Negligence addresses failures in safeguards and governance, while UDAP targets misleading or unfair statements about those safeguards. For exam candidates, the key is understanding how courts and regulators use these tools to enforce both conduct-based and representation-based duties. Mastery of negligence and UDAP ensures learners can analyze liability in scenarios ranging from inadequate cybersecurity to deceptive privacy notices. The elements of negligence in privacy disputes mirror those in general tort law: duty, breach, causation, and damages. Organizations owe a duty of care to safeguard the data they collect, aligning with industry norms and legal expectations. Breach occurs when controls are insufficient, oversight is lax, or maintenance lapses allow vulnerabilities to persist. Causation links these failures to harms such as identity theft, fraud, or loss of consumer trust. Damages may include statutory remedies, actual financial losses, or injunctive relief requiring improvements. For learners, the key concept is reasonableness. Negligence liability hinges on whether an organization acted as a reasonable steward of data under the circumstances. Scenarios may test whether actions taken or not taken met this threshold. The duty of care in privacy law requires organizations to adopt reasonable security measures and governance processes. This includes conducting risk assessments, implementing access controls, and updating systems against known threats. Courts and regulators often use foreseeability as the benchmark. If vulnerabilities were well known or industry frameworks establish clear safeguards, organizations may be negligent for failing to act. For exam purposes, the key idea is that duty is not abstract, but shaped by context. An online retailer handling payment information faces different care obligations than a small nonprofit with limited data holdings. Recognizing these distinctions allows candidates to apply negligence analysis appropriately in different scenarios. Breach of duty occurs when organizations fail to maintain adequate controls. Examples include neglecting software patches, ignoring vendor risks, or failing to train employees on phishing threats. Such failures represent lapses in the ongoing maintenance of safeguards, not just initial design. For learners, breach is the moment where reasonable care is abandoned. On the exam, scenarios may test whether described practices, such as leaving outdated systems unpatched, constitute a breach of duty. Recognizing breach requires comparing actual practices against accepted norms, highlighting the practical nature of negligence analysis. Causation connects breach to harm, a requirement that is often contested in privacy cases. Plaintiffs may struggle to show that inadequate security directly caused identity theft, particularly when multiple breaches or exposures exist. Courts may accept theories of increased risk as sufficient harm, while others require proof of actual misuse. For candidates, the key term is causation. Negligence requires more than bad practice, it requires a link to damage. Exam questions may test whether harm is sufficiently connected to organizational failures. Understanding causation ensures that negligence analysis remains grounded in demonstrable injury rather than abstract risk. Damages in negligence claims can take several forms. Statutory damages provide fixed amounts regardless of actual harm, while actual damages compensate for financial losses. Injunctive relief compels organizations to improve security, and punitive damages may apply in egregious cases. For learners, the taxonomy of remedies illustrates the range of consequences negligence can trigger. On the exam, scenarios may test which damages are available under particular statutes or tort theories. Recognizing this variety underscores that negligence exposure is not only financial but also operational, requiring organizations to change practices under court or regulatory supervision. Foreseeability serves as a critical benchmark in negligence analysis. If vulnerabilities are widely recognized, such as unencrypted sensitive data or outdated software, organizations are expected to address them. Failure to act on foreseeable risks may be treated as negligence per se, particularly when statutes or regulations impose explicit duties. For exam purposes, the key terms are foreseeability and negligence per se. Scenarios may test whether ignoring a well-known risk violates statutory or industry standards. This reinforces the principle that negligence is judged not against perfect foresight, but against what a reasonable actor would have anticipated under the circumstances. The standard of care in negligence claims is often shaped by industry norms and recognized frameworks. Guidance from NIST, ISO, or regulatory agencies may serve as benchmarks for what constitutes reasonable safeguards. Organizations that follow these frameworks demonstrate diligence, while those that deviate without justification risk liability. For exam candidates, recognizing the role of frameworks in defining care is essential. Scenarios may test whether adherence to or deviation from standards influences negligence claims. This demonstrates how external benchmarks transform abstract duties into concrete obligations. Vendor negligence highlights the principle that responsibilities are non-delegible. Organizations cannot escape liability simply by outsourcing processing to third parties. They remain accountable for selecting vendors carefully, ensuring contracts impose appropriate safeguards, and monitoring compliance. For learners, the key concept is accountability. On the exam, scenarios may test whether organizations fulfilled their duty in overseeing vendors or whether negligence arose from lack of supervision. This principle reinforces that fiduciary and negligence duties extend throughout data ecosystems, not just within organizational walls. Product and service design defects can also intersect with negligence claims. If an app collects excessive data by default or lacks security features, courts may find the design itself unreasonable. For exam purposes, the key terms are design and defect. Scenarios may test whether negligent design choices expose organizations to liability. Recognizing this aspect of negligence ensures candidates understand that liability extends beyond maintenance failures to the very architecture of products and services. UDAP statutes provide a statutory framework for privacy enforcement focused on misrepresentations and unfair practices. Deception occurs when organizations make material misstatements or omissions about data practices, such as promising encryption without delivering it. Unfairness arises when practices cause substantial injury that consumers cannot reasonably avoid and that lack countervailing benefits. For exam candidates, the key terms are deception and unfairness. Scenarios may test whether conduct falls into one category or the other. UDAP frameworks demonstrate how enforcement can focus on both truthfulness in communication and fairness in practice. Privacy notices and representations are central to UDAP analysis. Once published, they become enforceable promises, binding organizations to their statements. Misleading or incomplete notices may be deemed deceptive, while unreasonable practices, despite assurances, may be deemed unfair. For learners, the key concept is enforceability. Notices are not mere marketing but legal commitments. On the exam, scenarios may test whether a discrepancy between notice and practice constitutes deception. Recognizing this principle emphasizes the alignment required between communication and conduct to avoid liability. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. The Federal Trade Commission serves as the primary federal enforcer of UDAP principles in privacy and security. Under Section 5 of the FTC Act, it has pursued companies that overstated their safeguards, failed to live up to privacy promises, or left known vulnerabilities unaddressed. Remedies typically include consent orders that impose 20-year monitoring and reporting requirements, as well as civil penalties where statutes permit. For exam candidates, the key idea is that the FTC defines the practical boundaries of what counts as reasonable security and truthful disclosure. Scenarios may test whether particular conduct, such as failing to patch widely publicized flaws, would be deemed unfair. Recognizing the FTC's central role shows how UDAP enforcement fills gaps left by sectoral laws. State attorneys general also wield UDAP authority, often coordinating across jurisdictions in multi-state investigations. These cases can produce large settlements, injunctions, and compliance monitoring obligations. Attorneys general frequently pursue deceptive privacy statements or inadequate security under general consumer protection powers, even in the absence of a state privacy statute. For learners, the key term is multi-state coordination. On the exam, scenarios may test whether state AGs can act under UDAP principles or whether authority lies exclusively with federal regulators. Recognizing this overlap reinforces that privacy enforcement is both national and local, requiring organizations to address layered accountability. The California Privacy Protection Agency adds another dimension by linking privacy-specific enforcement with UDAP concepts. The CPPA may investigate whether companies misrepresent their data practices or apply unfair consent mechanisms, and its administrative powers allow it to impose penalties and corrective measures. For exam candidates, the key idea is convergence. CPPA oversight complements traditional UDAP enforcement, creating multiple avenues for accountability. Scenarios may test whether a practice triggers CPPA, FTC, or state AG jurisdiction, requiring careful analysis of statutory scope. Understanding these interactions highlights California's unique role as a state with a dedicated privacy regulator. Misleading claims about technical safeguards are classic examples of deception. Organizations that advertise end-to-end encryption but use weaker methods may face UDAP enforcement. Similarly, promises of anonymization or secure deletion are enforceable commitments. Failure to deliver creates liability. For learners, the key concept is material misrepresentation. Consumers rely on these claims when deciding to use services. Exam questions may test whether technical statements were accurate or overstated. Recognizing this principle reinforces the importance of aligning public representations with actual practices, particularly where security or anonymity are marketed as selling points. Dark patterns design techniques that manipulate user choices are increasingly scrutinized under unfairness and deception theories. Examples include burying opt-out settings, using confusing toggles, or pre-selecting consent boxes. These practices may be deemed deceptive if they obscure material information, or unfair if they cause substantial, unavoidable harm. For exam purposes, the key terms are manipulation and consent. Scenarios may test whether an interface design meets fairness standards. Understanding dark patterns highlights how UDAP analysis extends beyond written notices into the design of user experiences, recognizing manipulation as a form of deception. Children's privacy provides another area of UDAP enforcement, particularly around representations of verifiable parental consent. If an organization claims to comply with COPPA but fails to obtain proper parental consent, regulators may view this as deceptive. For exam candidates, the key idea is that promises of compliance with statutes create enforceable obligations. Scenarios may test whether parental consent processes align with legal requirements or constitute misrepresentation. Recognizing this principle emphasizes that UDAP enforcement often builds on existing statutory frameworks, transforming compliance failures into deceptive practices. Data retention and secondary use practices can also trigger UDAP liability. If an organization promises to delete data after account closure but continues to retain or sell it, this constitutes a representation failure. For learners, the key concept is alignment with promises. Organizations must match retention and use practices to what they disclose. On the exam, scenarios may test whether secondary uses were adequately disclosed or whether retention exceeded commitments. Recognizing this risk highlights how UDAP principles enforce accountability in lifecycle management of personal data. Security representation gaps form another basis for unfairness claims. If an organization's security posture creates unreasonable risk of harm, even without explicit misrepresentation, regulators may pursue enforcement under unfairness. For exam candidates, the key concept is substantial injury. Inadequate security that foreseeably harms consumers is unfair, even if no promises were made. Scenarios may test whether failure to meet industry standards constitutes unfairness. Understanding this principle shows how UDAP fills enforcement gaps by holding organizations accountable for both their words and their actions. Telemarketing, text messaging, and email consent misstatements illustrate how marketing privacy intersects with UDAP. If companies claim to honor do-not-call registries or opt-outs but fail to do so, regulators may view this as deceptive. Similarly, overstating the scope of consent can create liability. For learners, the key terms are consent and misrepresentation. Exam scenarios may test whether marketing communications complied with representations or misled consumers. Recognizing these risks underscores how UDAP enforcement protects individuals from both misleading claims and intrusive practices. Remedies under UDAP enforcement include injunctions requiring organizations to stop deceptive practices, restitution to consumers, disgorgement of profits gained through misrepresentation, and civil penalties. For exam purposes, the key idea is remedial diversity. UDAP enforcement does not stop at fines but extends to structural reforms and financial accountability. Scenarios may test which remedies apply in given contexts, requiring candidates to match enforcement outcomes to statutory authority. Recognizing remedies highlights the broad range of tools regulators use to drive compliance. Consent orders are a hallmark of UDAP enforcement, particularly by the FTC. These orders impose ongoing monitoring, reporting, and independent assessor requirements to ensure future compliance. For learners, the key concept is long-term oversight. On the exam, scenarios may test whether consent orders require organizations to adopt specific practices or maintain documentation. Recognizing the durability of these orders underscores that UDAP enforcement extends well beyond the initial investigation. Individual accountability is another theme, as regulators occasionally pursue officers, engineers, or executives personally when deception is egregious. For example, knowingly approving misleading privacy statements may expose individuals to liability. For exam candidates, the key term is personal liability. Scenarios may test whether individuals can be held accountable or whether liability rests solely with organizations. Recognizing this dimension highlights how UDAP enforcement promotes accountability throughout leadership and technical teams. Compliance program enhancements are often required to mitigate negligence and UDAP risks. These include adopting stronger governance, improving notice and consent mechanisms, and conducting regular audits. Continuous monitoring, testing, and auditing sustain truthful practices over time, ensuring representations remain accurate as systems evolve. For exam purposes, the key idea is sustainability. Compliance is not static, but ongoing. Scenarios may test whether monitoring systems adequately support accurate disclosures. Recognizing this requirement reinforces that UDAP enforcement expects organizations to embed compliance into culture and operations. By synthesizing negligence and UDAP, candidates see how liability arises from both inadequate safeguards and inaccurate disclosures. Negligence ensures organizations act with reasonable care, while UDAP ensures they communicate honestly and fairly. Together, these frameworks form the backbone of U.S. privacy enforcement, linking liability exposure to accurate disclosures, reasonable security, and ongoing diligence. Thanks for tuning in to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, your trusted source for cybersecurity news and insights. Remember to subscribe at baremetalcyber.com so you never miss an update. And visit cyberauthor.me for best-selling cybersecurity books that equip you with expert knowledge. Until next time, stay secure and stay vigilant.